This video is about the intersection of MBTI personality type and personality disorder for Annie Wilkes in the movie called Misery. Annie Wilkes is an ISFJ personality, which is the most common personality type, and her personality disorder is covert narcissism. She's a sensor-feeler personality that is not intuitive, and sensor-feeler personality types are all predisposed and prone to covert narcissism, the feminine, vulnerable kind of narcissism. All feeler personalities have feminine, feeler, female brains, and the sensor feelers are prone to covert narcissism, while the intuitive feelers are prone to borderline personality disorder, covert borderline of male and overt borderline of female. This is consistent, accurate, reliable profiling. So I've been wanting to make a video about ISFJ Annie Wilkes as a very accurate and excellent representation of the ISFJ personality type and the covert narcissism they display. I'm working on another video that is similar about ISFJ covert narcissist Mark David Chapman, the guy who killed John Lennon, and I felt like I had to go ahead and finish this video analysis of ISFJ Annie Wilkes as a covert narcissist before proceeding to the video about Mark. I grew up with a common ISFJ covert narcissist like Annie Wilkes as my mother, and Annie reminds me so much of my own mother and disgusts me so much that I put off doing this video for a long time. Kathy Bates, the actress who played Annie Wilkes, is an ISFJ covert narcissist also, and that's a primary reason why this portrayal is so accurate. If you think ISFJ common covert narcissists won't go this far as to murder, you would be wrong. True crime has some examples of ISFJ common covert narcissists that resorted to murder, like ISFJ Erin Patterson, ISFJ Lucy Letby, ISFJ Jeremy Best. I watched some behind-the-scenes director's interview with Rob Reiner about the making of the Misery movie, and nowhere does anyone set out to make a movie representing a common covert narcissist character. And no one intended to specifically represent an ISFJ character. But that's what ended up getting represented perfectly. No one seemed to realize that when they chose Kathy Bates that she was the perfect personality match for the character. I mean, since ISFJ is the most common female personality type in every 1 in 5 females, I guess odds are in favor of an ISFJ getting the part, but still, there's an aspect of random luck or unintended synchronicity there where the stars just aligned perfectly to make ISFJ Kathy Bates as the perfect casting decision for the character Annie Wilkes. Kathy Bates jokes in interviews that her mother thinks Kathy is playing herself in the Misery movie, and I know this joke is reality in many ways from growing up with a mother just like Kathy Bates and Annie Wilkes. So I heard Rob Reiner say in an interview that lots of movie adaptations had previously been made of Stephen King movies, but a friend of Rob's read the Misery book and did research on it, if anyone had made a movie of that, and came to find out that Stephen King was being much more picky about letting anyone make a movie about Misery, since it was a very personal story to him. But he seemed to trust Rob Reiner with it, and Rob Reiner said that Stephen King saw himself as the writer, Paul Sheldon, getting kind of trapped by his own success on a specific story, and wanting to maybe kill off a character to go in a new direction and work on different kinds of projects. And Annie was supposed to be a representation of the collective of fans that would go crazy and be angry at him for killing off a character. So it's very interesting to learn what the movie Misery was reportedly intended to portray, which was just kind of crazy fan behaviors, and what it actually turned out portraying, which was the perfect template of an ISFJ common covert narcissist. It's amazing how one of the most perfect representations of an ISFJ common covert narcissist in movie history, Annie Wilkes, had her covert narcissism so accurately depicted in 1990, before internet forums flooded with information about the nuances of narcissism. Now so much content on the topic of narcissism, covert narcissism, particularly as it applies in this case, is flooding social media, and so much of it accurately describes just exactly how common covert narcissists act so jealous and so envious, and like they want to steal the identities of people they see as cooler, and how they're invested more in fiction and fantasy worlds than they are loyal to reality, because it helps them feed their addiction to the drug called narcissistic supply, and keep reality from obstructing their pursuit of these hits of that drug of choice, or messing up their false self-image. And all of this overcompensates for an inborn inferiority complex they have from being born common personalities that are relatively dull. Speaking of the modern internet getting better at understanding the nuances of different representations of narcissism, when I did searches on Google and YouTube recently, I'm still not seeing people actually label Annie Wilkes as a covert narcissist. They just think of this woman as ambiguously disturbed and unhinged from trauma or something, but Even in current times, I'm not seeing people make the connection that Annie Wilkes is an amazing representation of ISFJ common covert narcissism. So that's why I think it's important to make this video. I think the label bipolar is put on these ISFJ types too often, and I always say bipolar is one of many bogus diagnoses that is given to the more emotionally expressive SFJ FE users who are most accurately diagnosed as covert narcissists. It bothers me even more when they get falsely diagnosed as borderline, since only the intuitive empaths are truly the types that express as borderline. So if they have to be misdiagnosed, I guess I would rather them still get labeled with the bogus diagnosis of bipolar. I think Stephen King is also an ISFJ personality. I mostly find his work overrated, though I liked some of the movies a bit more when I was younger. I liked The Dark Half as a teenager. ISFJ is the most common personality type, and it's more common in women, but it's still pretty common in people with male sexual anatomy also, like ISFJ Jelly Roll, ISFJ Chad Daybell. So it wouldn't be surprising that if Stephen King is thinking of behaviors he's observed from crazy fans, it makes sense statistically that a lot of his crazy fans would be SFJ like him, since those people are most abundant in the population. So the way SFJ behaviors are depicted perfectly in Annie Wilkes makes sense based on Stephen King drawing from his most likely fan base. But I also think Stephen was probably projecting himself through Annie even more so. Just like Annie doesn't want to be boring old Annie, she wants to be Paul Sheldon, the brilliant writer. Stephen King also doesn't want to be like Annie. That is just like him. He wants to be like Paul, the brilliant writer, the censor thinker type, the seemingly more competent type of SJSI user, an ISTJ type. But Stephen is actually more like ISFJ Annie, and the specific ways the common covert narcissism of ISFJ types is depicted is accurate in Annie, because Stephen King, the author, is an ISFJ covert narcissist himself. Anyone with a feeler personality has a female brain and identifies more with female characters, and anyone with the word covert in their diagnosis is lying most of all and misrepresenting things and trying to throw people off the trail of the truth, way more so than people with the word overt in their diagnosis. So while ISFJ Stephen King is trying to make it seem like he's identifying with ISTJ Paul, the brilliant writer, he's actually identifying more with ISFJ covert narcissist Annie Wilkes, the unhinged covert narcissist that wants to covertly control people. So I think the Misery book and movie is personal to Stephen King for bigger reasons than was originally led on, and ISFJ covert narcissist Annie Wilkes is ultimately actually a projection of ISFJ Stephen King. I admit I haven't read the Misery book fully yet. I still need to get to that to comment most accurately and thoroughly on how Stephen King as an author acted like he relates more to the writer Paul, but in reality related more to the covert narcissist ISFJ crazy fan of Annie Wilkes, and projected themselves onto Annie. But I get that sense overall from what came out of the movie that Stephen King approved of. So I think Stephen King's projection of his own ISFJ common covert narcissist personality was equal or greater factor than his fans being SFJ personalities, and how this ISFJ common covert narcissist character was so accurately portrayed. I think Stephen King's overall obsession with horror and death and fantasy as a writer is one sign of covert narcissism, very similar to ISFJ covert narcissist Chad Daybell's novels. So these ISFJ common covert narcissists like Annie Wilkes are so understated, and their covert narcissism being so understated is why covert narcissism has been so successfully kept covert and proliferated so abundantly prior to the internet and social media exposing covert narcissism. ISFJ types don't embody what we imagine first when we imagine narcissists. We imagine overt narcissist traits first with narcissists, I think. Overt narcissist rhetoric is like bragging, I'm smarter than you, I'm faster than you, I'm richer than you, I'm more attractive than you. It's all about being more competent than everyone else. And covert narcissist rhetoric is all about out-victiming everyone with rhetoric like, look at everything I've done for you and how much I've suffered in life. So even though censor feelers who are the covert narcissists are the most common, we are only just coming into the times where we associate these kind of victim-y characteristics Annie has with any kind of narcissism. She's fat, so she's obviously not invested in getting narcissistic supply from the physicality of her body, where an ESFJ being more extroverted would put way more effort, like Lori Vallow, getting hits of narcissistic supply by looking like a Barbie swimsuit model. Annie's low IQ, so she isn't able to get narcissistic supply from being identified as brilliant, and this is the core of the ruin that common censor feeler covert narcissists devolve into, because they're born into personality types that are dull, common, low IQ, And in ISFJ's case, they're not physically attractive either, and so they can have an inferiority complex that they feel they need to overcompensate for by seeking hits of a drug called narcissistic supply, so they stop feeling like a nobody. I saw one description of Annie Wilkes online that said everyday evil, and that's a great description because it's the evil that is exhibited by the most common and so-called normal personalities in the population. The sensor-feeler personalities are exclusively the types predisposed to covert, feminine, vulnerable variety of narcissism. And when they don't have anything going for them physically or intellectually, then we see them like Annie, trying to be identity thieves, trying to hijack the identities and live vicariously like through the people they see as cooler than them, like Annie sees Paul. So a huge part of the giveaway that Annie Wilkes is a covert narcissist is how she's attempting to be an identity thief, to take over Paul's work as her own while she holds him captive and forces him to publish his works the way she wants them written. There's another video I have in a backlogged queue about the movie called Identity Thief, which features a male and a female ISFJ covert narcissist behaving as identity thieves. So that's related to this, and another example of how ISFJs are common covert narcissists that engage in identity theft. And again, the latest guru content on the internet and social media would also have content saying that covert narcissists often engage in identity theft in various ways, also trying to become like the people they envy. ISFJs aren't like the super genius evil villain types like INTJ Hannibal Lecter, but the reason these ISFJ types are the most scary is because they're so common, making up about 1 in every 4 people. So super genius outlier villains like INTJ Hannibal or ENTJ Klaus Michelson, they are such a small minority population that no matter how intimidating they are on their own, they can't be very intimidating collectively because their numbers are so relatively small. But the ISFJ are way too common, so there isn't anyone who isn't dealing with the SFJ kind of narcissist in their lives every day. If you miraculously don't have an SFJ in your immediate family, you definitely can't escape them anywhere you go in society, shopping, schooling, court, government, etc. There's no one escaping the reach of common SFJ covert narcissists, and that's what makes them far more scary than the rare outlier supervillain NTJ type antisocial overt narcissist. So each of the 16 MBTI personality types at their worst are either predisposed to covert or overt narcissism or covert or overt borderline. Not all people may devolve to their worst possible presentation, but many do currently due to a majority population of narcissists defining narcissism as synonymous with normalcy and success. The types that end up having covert in their diagnosis, like all of the SF types, regardless of gender, are covert narcissists, and all male empath, NF types, and NTB types are covert borderlines. So if they have covert in their diagnosis, then their web of lies is going to be much bigger relatively than overt types. It sometimes seems like the covert types, everything they say, the truth is exactly the opposite after you reinterpret it through their covert diagnosis. So you definitely have to play the opposite game to interpret ISFJ types like Annie Wilkes. And the thing she says, you can't take what she says at face value because she has covert in her diagnosis as a common covert narcissist. It's obvious that reality is the opposite of Annie's lies when Paul wakes up and meets Annie and she says she's not been able to take him to the hospital because the storm has been so bad. But meanwhile, the sun is shining brightly through the window and the weather looks beautiful. So when Annie is saying she's Paul's #1 fan, she's actually his #1 hater also, like from the movie Mean Girls kind of hater in so many ways because of her jealousy and resentment over him being the brilliant one and her being the dull one. And this is consistent with what modern narcissism gurus online and social media circles are saying as well. If that covert narcissists are consumed by envy, trying to mimic people and steal their identities to any extent possible, while also resenting them and being their biggest haters, trying to sabotage them and ruin them so they won't keep always outshining them so much and making them look so dull in comparison. So I kind of experienced something similar with my ISFJ mother where she, as a child, where she would brag to people about how I was gifted in school, but then behind closed doors she would try to sabotage my educational goals, like try to keep me from going to college so that I wouldn't outshine her or make her look even more stupid in comparison by being college educated. So Annie takes this way further, but it shows the pattern of ISFJ covert narcissists. Like, they will act like they're your #1 fan or supporter and so proud and admiring of your brilliance, but they're harboring this hidden jealousy and resentment and feeling dull and unremarkable and stupid and ugly and like nobodies. So the person who to your face is claiming they're your biggest fan and supporter is actually covertly behind the scenes trying to sabotage you, even cripple and disable you and silence you like Annie does with drugging and hobbling Paul. They will try to sabotage the person they claiming to support and admire, so there will be less of a gap of brilliance between them to keep feeding and flaring up their inferiority complex. So I think Annie talking with baby talk words like cock-a-doodie or dirty birdie when she's a woman over age 50 is really a sign of the covert narcissism, because Covert narcissists are trying to stay children forever and never grow up, or that's just the way they are, whether they're trying to or not. Most people think all people go through stages in life, infancy, childhood, and adulthood, and we transition through them, but covert narcissists are intellectually and emotionally stunted and refusing to transition into real adulthood or incapable of transitioning into adulthood. It's more obvious in the SFP types that are so immature and infantilized and childlike of all the MBTI types, but even in SJ types who try to be the ones that appear responsible and be teachers and police officers, we still see this clinging to being a child. Believing in God is the most prominent and primary way that sensor feeler types predisposed to covert narcissism show that they want to remain children forever. Believing in fairy tales like they're real. Believing literally they have a miracle granting sky daddy to relieve them of all their pains in life is a sign of rejecting the transition to real adulthood and clinging to the mentality of a child forever and not letting it go. Being incapable of transitioning into adulthood. So most of what I've said so far is focusing on her covert narcissism, but some points I'll make about her MBTI personality type are that she's definitely an obvious SJ-SI user. She's common, she's not very intelligent, she has common average intelligence like a typical common sensor feeler personality. She's very prudish, getting offended by profanity, which is a sign of SI. She's definitely an FE user, as she's being emotionally expressive at least and emotionally explosive at worst. Unlike SFP FI users who would suppress way more emotion and then blindside you like a snake in the grass. At least FE users give you a warning and don't blindside you because their FE lets off a little steam, making their bark worse than their bite a lot of times, unlike FI users who don't bark before they bite. So as bad as Annie is as an FE user expressing feelings, FI users can be a lot worse with the way they quietly blindside people who never knew what they had brewing emotionally underneath the surface. Annie's dominant SI, especially if it's looping with a moderate to heavy TI, so introverted sensing and introverted thinking, keeps her good at being covert and secretive. But her FE keeps her flying off the emotional handle and blurting out things emotionally that conflict with the false self-image she's trying to uphold as a covert narcissist. Getting stuck in the grip of her inferior Annie under stress and looping with that emotionally expressive FE makes her feel overwhelmed with all the possibilities of life that she usually pays as little attention to as possible normally. ISFJ covert narcissists, like I said, everyone has a mother or a grandma that's ISFJ for the most part, but if not, you have them as teachers and nurses. Another sign of the covert narcissism in ISFJ Annie Wilkes is her keeping her captive hostage, drugged up and incoherent, under the guise of just nursing him back to health after a car accident. I'd say for the most part, never trust taking food from ISFJ covert narcissist types, and don't be surprised if they drug you. They often are nurses, and so they may have access to things that people who aren't working in the medical profession don't have access to, and knowledge on how to drug people that exceeds the average knowledge on the subject. So don't take medication with these ISFJ common covert narcissists. Who knows how they're poisoning you to keep you weak and cooperative and unable to fight back. Lucy Letby is like a modern day Annie Wilkes, since Lucy is also an ISFJ nurse who killed multiple babies she was responsible for in the hospital. ISFJ Erin Patterson, the woman who killed her ex's family members with a beef Wellington that was tainted with poisonous mushrooms. That's another example of how these ISFJ common covert narcissists and how they'll try to poison people by bringing them an oh-so-delicious meal. They'll tell everyone they slaved over in the kitchen for hours to guilt-trip them before poisoning them for dinner. ISFJ types are known to be Munchausen with their kids too, like ISFJ Dee Blanchard was using her ISFP daughter Gypsy Rose, pretending her daughter had cancer to fraudulently receive charity money. So ISFJ types need the people around them to be easy to control. And if a child in their natural state is not easy enough to control, they're not passive enough, most sensor feeler common covert narcissists commonly drug their kids with Benadryl or melatonin now these days, but they can also take it much further with their kids or with other people. But ISFJ Dee took it further with her daughter, making her daughter get a feeding tube on false pretenses and make her daughter believe she was unable to walk and wheelchair bound. Also, she could have more control over her daughter's entire existence and exploit it. So ISFJ love the people around them to be passive and non-combative and compliant, and if they have to drug them to get that version of a person, they will. An SJSI user are often found in financial fraud schemes like this one Dee Blanchard was pulling to get charity money for a sick child. ISFJ types are almost always overweight, like Kathy Bates, Jelly Roll, Chad Daybell, Roseanne, and Tarma Arnold. The most in shape ISFJ I think I've seen is Britney Spears, and who knows if she would have had so much discipline to keep her figure without her handlers in her conservatorship controlling her with medications and controlling every other aspect of her life. Yes, MBTI personality types are associated with physical features. Feeler type MBTI types are shorter and more curvy in general. The feminine feeler brains have less discipline with diet than the masculine thinker personalities. The T-type personalities are taller and thinner and more athletic in general than the F personalities. Feeler female brains make more feminine bodies, and masculine thinker male brains make more masculine, less curvy bodies. Introverts hide themselves away from people more than extroverts, so they put less effort into their physical attractiveness than extroverts. So ISFJ, being a heavier and relatively less attractive woman, is fitting the ISFJ profile. So I'm looking at some of the estimates for MBTI personality type population distribution for males and females, and it says 19% of females are ISFJ and 8% of males are ISFJ. And then similar to ISFJ is ESFJ, who are similar but usually more attractive. And for ESFJ, we have 17% of females and 8% of males. And I've said before, all feeler personalities have female brains. That's what makes them predisposed to covert narcissism, just like actual females. So even the 8% of ISFJ and 8% of ESFJ males are actually females if we look only at the gender of their brains, not the gender in their pants. So that makes up about a quarter of all so-called males, and a quarter of all women are these SFJ types, either ISFJ or ESFJ, common covert narcissists that use FE, extroverted feeling, the Karen types. The types that are known notoriously to be like the Karen types that are trying to overtly, they're trying to control people with emotional expressions. The other covert narcissists are the ISFP and ESFP, and those differ with the SFJ because the SFP types use FI, which suppresses emotion rather than suppresses emotions rather than expressing it. So like I said before, so the SFP, you don't really see the things they do coming because they were so quiet and didn't let on anything was wrong with them before they exploded. So almost as many people in the common general population are SFP as SFJ. The population distribution says ISFP females are 10%, and ESFP females are 10%, and ISFP males are 7%, and ESFP males are 7%. So it's just slightly lower than the SFJ variety of common covert narcissists, but almost the same. But this video about Annie Wilkes is showing us the behaviors of the SFJ kind of covert narcissist, not the SFP kind of covert narcissist. So I'm just making this contrast as an example, but trying not to talk too much about SFP types in this video. But going over these population statistics of the 4 common covert narcissist types gives everyone an idea just how prevalent covert narcissism is in the overall population. Nearly half of all people are predisposed to common covert narcissism as sensor feeler personalities. And that's why we have a world built by and for covert narcissists currently. We tend to think it's built more by thinker type overt narcissists who appear to be more successful. But it's this majority population of covert narcissists that are really building the worlds we all have to live in now. The ones running the schools that teach kids lies, running the insurance companies that exploit people, running all the systems in society that even neurodivergent, intuitive people who are significantly more intelligent than them have to be subjected to while these systems crush the life out of them. So the common covert narcissist types like ISFJ, Annie Wilkes, again, are the worst and most threatening group of narcissists of all just by their sheer numbers alone. Another giveaway for covert narcissism is Annie being a nurse that killed babies and kept trophy news articles about her work. Covert narcissists hate love, hate innocence, hate life, love death, and are loyal to evil. So just like she's envying a brilliant writer and being his hater out of resentment over him being brilliant and making her look dull in comparison, the covert narcissists feel similarly around babies and children, especially babies, since everyone seems innocent as a baby. So covert narcissists see babies and they hate them out of resentment for the innocence they embody. That highlights the lack of innocence in them, making them look so evil in comparison. Narcissists are the personification of the devil, and the devil metaphorically means the evil personified. And doing the devil's work means working against innocence and love, which means working against babies. So Annie wanting to take babies out of this world and actually doing it is a huge sign of covert narcissism, since covert narcissists are obsessed with death, and their favorite targets for death are people embodying innocence and love. Babies are like a symbol of innocence, and anything or anyone that is symbolic of love or innocence is a covert narcissist's favorite target for destruction. Covert narcissists are constantly name-dropping popular people to make themselves seem more important than they are, and this ties heavily into their religiosity, since name-dropping God is the ultimate name-drop in the eyes of covert narcissists, having a supernatural being back up all of their delusional and evil agendas. SJSI users are those covert narcissists who used all the fearful rhetoric of SI introverted sensing to make people believe in God in masses. It's like they're aware their word means nothing, not just because as covert types they lie every other word, but because they're dumb common types with nothing really insightful to say, so they always need to make up a supernatural being to back them up, and will always cash in on all the covert narcissists before them that duped populations into believing God is real, and it means something when narcissists name drop God to back up their acts and quell their fears. One kind of subtle way, but still significant way that I've seen ISFJ try to steal the identities of people they see as cooler than them, which is directly related to MBTI, is how a lot of ISFJ and other SJ types will misrepresent their MBTI personality types on purpose. Mostly SJ types don't get into MBTI since it's over their head with their low intelligence, but if they do get interested in it at all, they seem to gather that they're not one of the outlier, rare, unusual, special types, and they're a boring, dull type, so they will tell everyone they're an INFJ, or an INTJ, or another type that's more rare and unusual, special, or cooler. My own ISFJ mother will insist she's an INFJ personality after I made it seem like it's such a profound revelation that I was an INFJ. And I've seen other ISFJ types do that too. A lot of people get mistyped by MBTI, especially common types, and partly that's because it's a ballparking test, not meant to be the final word on top typing, but also partly because too often, especially with covert types, they answer the questions how they wish they were rather than how they actually are. Personality database doesn't have more than around 100 votes for Stephen King's personality, but 35 people typed him as INTP. And I think the only way he seems like an NTP type at all is because the reverse of ISFJ is ENTP. So ISFJ under stress can present like ENTP. So I think it's possible that some of Stephen King's work may display an ENTP reverse type, especially considering how dark some of the work is, and also the movie The Dark Half touched on sort of multiple personality or split personality type thing, which NP types are predisposed to. When the main character had an absorbed twin that sort of becomes an alternate personality for him. So that's the one explanation for why some people mistyped him as INTP. And also not very many people relatively in the MBTI enthusiast community are even that interested in typing him. Most of the MBTI community are intuitive people and they're not finding him that interesting to profile. Also, just like I said, I've seen a lot of ISFJs act like wannabes of other types they think are cooler, so they will try to pretend and pass themselves off as types they think are cooler than ISFJ. So a lot of covert narcissists that want their own types or the types of their idols to be a cooler type may be mistyping him as an INTP to make him seem cooler. But he's absolutely not an intuitive personality. His work is made by and for common SJ/SI users. But as inaccurate as an INTP personality typing would be for Stephen King, there are ways that it's on the right track because NTP and SFJ are the reverse types of each other. So NTP types and SFJ types share all the same cognitive function, just in different orders of preference and strength. And when people are pushed to extremes or under stress, which who isn't in our current world, many people start looking like the reverse types, like they're stuck in the grip of their inferior function, instead of the usual looking addicted to their dominant cognitive function. So Stephen King is Stephanie King in my book as an ISFJ common covert narcissist born with a feeler personality, female brain, gender dysphoria, who projected herself into one of the most iconic horror film covert narcissists ever portrayed to date, ISFJ Annie Wilkes. As popular as Stephen King is, his popularity is also kind of understated in the way an ISFJ would be. And one thing I will say is that if ISFJ covert narcissists who love death channel this impulse for death into fiction horror writing rather than actually killing people in real life, then thank goodness for Stephen King getting into writing and getting some success so he wouldn't have to getting also a good flow of the drug called narcissistic supply, so he wouldn't have so much resentment over lack of quote-unquote success that he would have to go to some of the extremes of his character Annie Wilkes out of an inferiority complex and a covert narcissist obsession with death. I saw some interviews with Stephen King saying that he had a scrapbook when he was 10 years old with news clippings about a serial killer, and it freaked his mom out, made her worried about him as a kid. And so since he was born a common covert narcissist ISFJ personality, he always was obsessed with death from his childhood. Him keeping scrapbooks with the news clippings is exactly like Annie Wilkes keeping a scrapbook of the news articles about the babies she killed. I also saw another interview with Stephen King saying that he writes books about ordinary people in extraordinary situations, and that's because as an SJ/SI user, he's part of the most common majority population of ordinary, aka normal people, so he's writing what he knows. He also said he's a very good man, a very good husband, a family man, and a good person, and he thinks it's possible he might have turned out to be a bad person if he didn't have this writing outlet to let off some pressure from his evil inclinations. This is revealing of the covert narcissist's obsession with death and evil, and reiterating what I said before about writing is a good outlet for covert narcissists to keep them from actually murdering people in real life. Same with actors for the most part. Actors get to play out stories realistically, but still in fiction. Stories about killing people or whatever other kind of evil to engage in, and then that might be an outlet to keep them from doing the most horrible things in real life. And same effect is for audiences too, like them watching a movie about murder may be a substitute for engaging in it. I think the reason the majority population is very interested in producing and consuming horror is because they are common narcissists, trying to have a creative outlet for their obsessions with death. Stephen King said in childhood, kids express their fears, but in adulthood, they learn to sublimate them. So I'd say covert types especially learn to suppress expressing real emotions, even if they are FE using extroverted feeling using expressive SFJ types, and they end up having to, like Stephen King says, sublimate their socially unacceptable inclinations like loving death into creative, socially acceptable outlets like writing fiction, horror. So if only all SFJ covert narcissists could do the same, they wouldn't end up some of the worst true crime cases like ISFJ Chad Daybell. I watched some interviews with Stephen King to confirm if I was going in the right direction typing him, and yeah, he definitely seems like an ISFJ common covert narcissist. One of the big tells is how he makes fun of everything, makes a joke, and mocks everything, especially in interviews with audiences. It's like he turns into a stand-up comedian like ISFJ Roseanne or ISFJ Tom Arnold. He's just so proud of his own quips, no matter how cringy they are. Covert narcissists love comedy because it's a way to deflect and make light of things that should be taken seriously, but they can't take it seriously as narcissists. The way ISFJ Roseanne mocks motherhood with her comedy show based on her own life as a common covert narcissist with zero maternal sense. If guys like Stephen King didn't go the route of writing and get the narcissistic supply they're dying for from writing, he could have just ended up another Chad Daybell, making very cringy, death-obsessed novels that everyone would tune out and needing to go to more extreme measures to satisfy their obsession with death. Stephen King also displays the childlike immaturity when in interviews he's repeatedly jump-scaring a woman and openly talking about how obnoxious it is that he has those random impulses to jump-scare people for reactions, and how he thinks someone should punch him in the mouth to set him straight. So like I said before, the common covert narcissists, like, they're intellectually, emotionally stunted, and they cannot transition from childhood to adulthood. They're always stuck in the child mind and just putting on the performance of adulthood. Another thing I heard Stephen King say in an interview about his greatest fears is that he sees his primary job as bringing people back to the mindset of their childhood. And he says it in a very vague and flowery way, and that's why there's a lot of children featured as main characters in his stories. He says this whole bringing people back to the mindset of childhood in a very vague and flowery way that most people just brush off like, oh yeah, who doesn't want to go back and relive the innocence of childhood? But what's actually being revealed isn't as sweet as it seems on the surface. It's just revealing the common covert narcissism that's incapable of actually transitioning to adulthood, and so it wants to make everyone else childlike forever with them. And a big part of the SFJ's incapability of transitioning into adulthood is the fearfulness that SI endows them with. They're so fearful, they're afraid to grow up. That's why they invented religion. And going back to me saying Stephen King as an ISFJ is projecting himself into ISFJ Annie Wilkes, the way Annie is portrayed as getting really overexcited and giggly and giddy like a child in a really over-the-top way is the common covert narcissism that Stephen and Annie both have in common as ISFJ personalities that prevent them from ever growing up. And so that's being mirrored when we see Stephen King jump scaring a lady during an interview. It's the same as Annie. Stephen King said something particularly about this book, It, about the clown Pennywise being about not being able to transition into adulthood. So I think Stephen King is revealing a lot to the world unintentionally about ISFJ common covert narcissists when he's revealing how they really stay children forever. And they want everyone else to stay children forever with them. And since most people are also common narcissists, they go ahead along with him as part of their own natural cognitive function programming too. Stephen King does a lot of baby talk or kitty lingo, just like Annie as well. In one interview, he said as a kid he was afraid of going to Banana Land, as if anyone knows what that child lingo is referring to. But again, he's showing that The juvenile vocabulary he is using is distinct to common covert narcissists incapable of transitioning into adulthood. Stephen King said the basis of The Shining was his kid drew pictures on a manuscript, and he had a thought like, I could kill this kid. So under stress, we might see a more ENTP personality like with an ISFJ like Stephen, and I think the Jack character from The Shining could represent that a lot. I think Jack Nicholson is ESTP in real life, but he sort of did a good job looking like he has the crazy eyes of an NEDOM ENTP type, and he definitely acts ADHD, unhinged like an ENTP type in The Shining. NP types are prone to legitimate personality disorder if stress goes too far. So again, it's probably a wonderful thing Stephen King wrote about murder in his book, so he didn't need to resort to actual murder like some ISFJ covert narcissists will do when they're prone to present like ENTPs under stress. I'm working on a video about ISFJ covert narcissist Mark David Chapman next, and I think it confirms my ISFJ personality typing for Stephen King. How I'm not the only one who has noticed that Mark Chapman and Stephen King look eerily similar physically. And like I said, people who have the same personality type often share many physical characteristics. So Stephen King being overweight most of the time indicates feeler personality. He has a band called Rock Bottom Remainders also, which seems very feeler personality to me, and his FE driving him to be emotionally expressive. I saw someone mention in another interview Stephen King saying something like, if he wasn't a writer, he may have been an assassin. So it seems like Stephen King is always waving his common covert narcissist flag by making jokes about how he'd really be a murderer if he wasn't a writer. So it may have seemed like a tangent talking so much about the author Stephen King when this is an analysis of ISFJ Annie Wilkes, but actually all of this is directly relevant and on topic to accurately typing her, since I'm asserting that the author projected themselves into the character, which is why the character is such an accurate representation of ISFJ common covert narcissist. So an ISFJ author, Stephen King, invented this ISFJ character, Annie Wilkes, and it was played by an ISFJ actor, Kathy Bates, and so that congruency of projection and personality matches just makes this a very accurate representation of the ISFJ common covert narcissist personality.
When the night has come